Good afternoon to everyone. Happy Sabbath. It's good to be with everyone here and those who may be listening, either our technology or those who might listen inadvertently in the future and click on the sermon and then click off again. Welcome to you as well. I'm always optimistic how things are going to turn out, right? And of course, Sam, you know I love it. Thank you for that special music. I'm just glad you didn't have pictures of our seniors like you did last time rolling in the background, right? That was unfair, but that was still, I see a few eyes and the moist eyes here. And again, it was just beautiful and fitting for today and how we celebrate our seniors amongst us. So again, thank you very much for that. And I will say, speaking of senior moments, I forgot about 465 on the way in, and we got really backlogged there. So we're glad to get here. And as they say, when you start getting older, the memory is the second thing to go. I forgot what the first one was. I knew you'd like that. But also, I want to tell Mr. McNeely very thank you, big thank you for really, encapsulate. My wife and I were sitting back there and said, man, he just encapsulated the school year perfectly on what we're trying to do with the young people and really setting the stage for that. And really, I think it's going to be an exciting year. It's always an exciting program, but I think the theme is especially exciting this year. Building that concept and the awe and the authority of God with our young people and getting to know God. And it's just really, really good. So I very, very much appreciated the sermonette. If you were to turn, you don't need to turn there, in 1 Kings 1, verse 1, it says he was old, advanced in years, and they put covers on him, but he could not get warm. Imagine he was sitting there in a chair covered with a blanket, probably not feeling very well, probably very weak. Imagine he sat there probably not eating the way he used to, not enjoying the foods he used to eat, and not enjoying maybe eating very much. Probably sat there with his eyes dim, probably even painful to get up and walk at times, and not wanting to walk very far. See, he sat there with a blanket, and he was old. But you may not know, this gentleman, if you read a different verse, in 1 Samuel 5, it says he was 30 years old when he began to reign, and he reigned 40 years. See him in this spot where he's old, and he can't even get warm. But there was a time he was king, and he reigned in glory, in splendor, in majesty, as a king for 40 years. One who upheld the law of the land, God's law, God's way of life. But you may not realize, you read in 1 Samuel 11, that he committed some really bad sins, some really dark sins in his life. And that's sort of hard to think about when you think here's a man that had committed these sins and you see him at this spot in his life, and all sorts of thoughts might go through your mind about what kind of man this was. But you may not realize, or you may have to be reminded, that God saw something quite special in him when he was just a young boy. Just for reference, that's in 1 Samuel 16. When he was very young and no one else even took notice of him because he was out in the field and he wasn't even all that special, when they came looking for a king and 7 other brothers were paraded for that interview, for that job, who the ones who certainly would have been the ones you would have picked, he wasn't even there. He was out in the field doing what he did as a small, ruddy boy. But God saw something different. 4 very different slices of a man's life, David's life. And I would say if you saw only one of those slices, and that's all you saw, you could draw a very specific and definite conclusion about who he was. Based on what you saw, based on that one piece that you saw about him, you might come up with something that may or may not be accurate. And often in life, it seems that's how life sort of works, doesn't it? Because we often only see people in certain slices, right? We don't get to see a full array of someone's life. And then it's very easy to draw conclusions based on what we see. And sometimes we might hold on to us, we might see them in that slice, and then time can go on, but we can still freeze time in that slice of 5, 10, 15, 20 years ago, and how we look at and how we view people. So sometimes we do that, and sometimes it's a convenient way in a sense, because I think we can say, I know this person based on what I saw, based on who he was. I saw this man, he was king, so therefore he's like this. I saw him when he was a boy, and his behavior was such, you know what, that's who he is. And then we get the box out, they put him in a box, put a ribbon on it, and we've got a nice little package we can look at, because now we understand that person. This is Jesus at the start. Mark chapter 6, I'm sorry. Mark chapter 6 and verse 2. Very early in his ministry, when the Sabbath had come, he began to teach in the synagogue. And many hearing him were astonished, saying, where did these men get these things? And with what wisdom is this which is given to him, that such mighty works are performed by his hands? In verse 3, here's the slice, here's the box that we know this man. Is this not the carpenter, the son of Mary, the brother of James, Joseph, Judas, and Simon, and are not his sisters here with us? And so they were offended at him. That's how they saw him. And they saw him very much as Mary's boy, one of her sons. They had him confined in this box. They saw him as the son of Mary, and they could not realize he was the son of God. So my question this afternoon that I want to explore in the time we have remaining is, how do we look past the slice of life that we see someone's life? How do we look past that little narrow, that slice that we have, and understand that person? How do we look past the slice of our own life as well, in the time spot that we might find ourselves in? And I think it's an important concept, but I think the answer to that and how we successfully navigate that has a lot to do with how we forgive others, how we love others, and how we build a sense of unity in God's family. So in the remaining time, I just want to go through a couple takeaways on how we do this, because it's not an easy thing. It's a very natural thing for us to see people in certain spots in their life and to always sometimes see them that way. So I just want to go over a couple things when you start thinking about this. And I think when you start to answer how we can do that successfully, I think a big part is seeing as God sees, right? Seeing as God sees. And God sees things with the end in mind. That's where God starts. He looks out over this narrow, confined time constraint, and he looks way down the road into the future, and he sees things with the end in mind. Look at Romans 4 in verse 17. Romans 4 in verse 17. This is breaking into a thought, talking about Abraham and his faithfulness. In the middle part of verse 17, it says, God who gives life to the dead and calls those things which do not exist as though they did. He gives life to the dead as if it's already happened. God is already down the road, and he sees things a certain way. He's not time-bound. He's not locked in an event, in a situation, in an instance with a person, and says, now I draw a conclusion. No, he's at the end of the story. That's where God starts. We know in Romans 8 and verse 14, he says, those who are led by the Spirit, they are the sons of God. He sees us as sons, his sons and his daughters. I think that's a very important concept you'll see as we go on. Having that end in sight and knowing that God views us as sons and daughters. We start looking at people that way because sometimes we think things, when we see a person, they've always been that way, or that's the way they'll always be, and sometimes we get fixated on that slice of life. And I go back to that today as we honor our seniors. So grateful again. I say our congregation is so blessed with the number of age groups we have, and we certainly have been blessed with many seniors in the group. And I think the cutoff, it's so funny every year what they determine the age for the seniors are. I think who's ever organizing it, it's always that age plus 3. Right? I think that's the sort of the way it works. I hope that keeps going that way. But no, we look at our seniors, and it's very easy to look at this slice of life the way we saw David in the chair who couldn't get warm. Sometimes we come to services and there's walkers that are double parked over here. Right? I think we need to address that. That's a problem. So we have those situations, and you see that and you think, this is how it's always been. But it hasn't always been that way. It hasn't always been that way. We're blessed with a fine group of seniors who have done some pretty amazing things with their lives. The same way, there was a time just when it said David ruled for 40 years. Well, many of these people for 40 years plus, they raised families in very, very difficult times. They made sacrifices in very difficult times. They accomplished a lot professionally. They unfortunately had to go through bearing children. They stood stoically for the truth. They've done a lot of great things. There's a bigger slice than what we see today. And it's easy sometimes to lose that sense of value if we don't start with the end in sight, because while we talk about those things I just mentioned, life is not over for our seniors. I never want to always be looking in the rearview mirror and say, they did this, they did this, they did this, because seniors, this message is for you. You are still someone now. You are still living now. You are still creating now. Look what God says when he has the end in sight when he talks about seniors. Look at Psalms chapter 92. Turn back there if you would. You know, sometimes I think as you get older, I think a song in some ways would have been appropriate, in some ways maybe not. Special music could have been Glory Days by Bruce Springsteen. Right? I think as you get older, it's easy sometimes to go back and talk about the glory days and to relive that. I think that's a natural tendency because I think sometimes it feels good to go back and look that way and to think about the glory days. But I would say to all our seniors here, the true days of glory are coming. They are on the way. It's a forward looking, not a backward looking glory. Look at Psalms 92 and verse 13. Those who are planted in the house of the Lord shall flourish in the courts of our God. Forget the walkers that you see. Forget the pain and the slowness in the walk. Forget the hearing difficulties. Those are physical things. That's a small slice of physical life that is small in the scheme of eternity. Here's how God looks at it. He says, while they shall still bear fruit in old age, they shall be fresh and flourishing, to declare that the Lord is upright. He is my rock, and there's no unrighteousness in him. That should be the hallmark. Right? I think that's interesting. I wish I had a graph. If I was technically on top of this, I would show you a graph that shows about the glory, right? The glory when you're young starts out here, and that glory begins to vanish like we said. But somewhere, God is saying, you know what, if done right, you know what the hallmarks are of old age? The glory, that there's an intersection point where the identity, if done well, becomes wisdom and righteousness. And we look to our seniors now because they are bedrock. They are looking more like God. They are people we go to because they have wisdom. They are people who, it says here, counts on God and sees him as their rock, their form of righteousness, where they put their trust. And there's a certain glory that comes there for seniors. And it says that's what God says it should look like. And if we see as God sees, we see there's great, great value. Even though, as Paul mentioned, we are in a body that is fading away. But there's a crisscross here as we get into that time of life Whereas a senior, that glory days should be there. The glory days are coming. Look what it says in 2 Corinthians. 2 Corinthians 3. It's a wonderful transformation that God allows to take place. But sometimes if we are not thinking or seeing as God sees, we can miss this piece. We can easily undervalue the seniors we have amongst us. We can look past the wisdom, the righteousness. I've enjoyed talking with many of you who have, like I said, dealt with difficult hardships. That's why I thought the special music was so beautiful, because you do lift us up. You silently move forward. There is a glory that is there. And we miss that if we don't see as God sees, because God says, these are my children. I see them glorified already. Right? That adds value when we interact with those people now. We see them somewhat differently, because it's easy in our society. Everything is now of the moment. It's got to be new, or we don't have use for it. And that can easily rub off on us as well. But look what God says in 2 Corinthians 3. This is what's happening. So it's happening to all of us, and I think especially for our seniors who have had more time for this to happen. Verse 18, but we all, with unveiled face, beholding as in a mirror the glory of God, are being transformed into the same image from glory to glory, just as by the Spirit of the Lord. Barnes' note said, you could say this when he says from glory to glory, being saturated with God's glory to the full extent and depth of his being, so he's like his Lord. Right? Isn't that a beautiful view of our seniors and the transformation that is happening? And it helps us to see them in a slightly different light, because we don't always get to see the full pullback picture in this life. When you meet someone, you just meet them right where you are. You don't have the backdrop. But again, the backdrop is not really the story where we've been, it's where we're going. And there's great value in our seniors, because God views them as sons and daughters who are being glorified now, who have a lot to offer. They have a lot to offer. I will, as a side note, if you noticed in that slice of David as well, talked about when he was a young man and was not really given much regard. And I would just, as a side note, mention our young people as well. It's easy to undervalue who they are and how God views them. I know God views them as his children, and they have great value today, and even more value as they continue to grow. And I know what it means. It's life-changing when children are dealt with as if they have value. I remember years ago when our children were very young that the minister our son had a car, and he would go down and he would ask him about his car and just play with him for a minute. He still remembers that to this day, because he knew he was a person. He was a person that needed to be talked to, needed to be understood. So important that we think in terms of how God views us. And then we understand that there is value in all. Turn to Matthew 25, a verse we know quite well. Matthew 25. Matthew 25 and verse 34, very famous section of Scripture. And this is when the King will say to those on his right hand, "Come, you blessed of my Father, inherit the kingdom prepared for you from the foundation of the world." This is sort of those who have done something. He's saying, "Come now into my kingdom." What is that? What is one of the things that's talked about here? And he goes on to say, because I was hungry, I was thirsty, I was naked. You did all these wonderful things. And they said, when did we do that to you? When did we do that? And in verse 40, it says, the king will answer and say to them, as surely I say to you, inasmuch as you did it to one of the least of these, my brethren, you did it to me. As you did it to the one who doesn't have much maybe value today, who's on the periphery, who's on the edge. It's this group maybe that we're talking about today, whether it's a senior, whether it's a young person, whether it's someone you catch in that slice of life and you think, well, I want to be with these people because that's a lot more fun for me and I get something in return and I can be with those people and this, and I don't pay much attention. He says, no, you did it to the least of those. You did it to me. And it's because I think that is such a powerful statement. We see that where Paul wrote that too. With Paul's conversion, what did God say to him? Saul, why are you persecuting, not the church? Why are you persecuting me? Because Jesus came as our Savior. He took on our sins. He took on our afflictions. And he understands us very, very deeply. And so he is either very appreciative or very hurt by how we treat all of his people. All of his people. And I understand that completely and fully when you think of it from a parent's standpoint. Right? If you have children and someone does something, someone remembers or someone does something very kind to a child, it is as you did that to me. Right? You've done that. It's an extension of me. And so when we start to see value in people, when we start to see from God's end point that this is a son and daughter of his, we do things in a way where we said, what do you mean? I would just do that to anybody. I wouldn't exclude. I see value because that is a son and daughter of yours. It's a beautiful and a powerful thing. I would next say, when we talk about this, how do we really move past or see past, if you want a title for the sermon, it's seeing past the slice. Because we're always caught in that moment where we see someone. How do we see past that? And I think when we think about ourselves, we think about other people, especially I'm going to think more in terms of our spiritual walk, that we start to think about growth is not a steady progression. Spiritual growth is not a steady progression. It's more of a mountain climb than going on an escalator. Wouldn't it be great if our spiritual journey was like at the airport, you step on an escalator and you just stand and it's constantly ticking on the way up? Wouldn't that be lovely? Unless I'm the only one, and it could be, it doesn't quite work that way. Well, I say it's more of a mountain climb. It's more of a mountain climb because you come to a spot and you hit a plateau. You come to a spot and you need to rest. You come to a spot and you may even have to go down a little bit before you can go back up. You come to spots and you have to take on a steep climb. And while I say we see someone not in that slice, because in that spot of that mountain journey, and someone is resting, wouldn't it be easy to make a judgment? If someone's having to traverse back down a little bit, to go back around another corner, it's easy to see them in a certain light and say, that doesn't seem to be quite right. It's easy in that spot to judge that. But it helps when we understand that our spiritual journey is not one of constant progression, with no, unfortunately, some difficult bumps along the way. And it helps, I think, too, when you look at that from that standpoint, you can look at people in context. You know, I say that's a small little window into that person, or maybe what they're going to, and maybe how they're having to deal. Look at one of these moments here. Turn to Matthew 16. We're right in that section. I mentioned that as well. If you saw David after he was caught in his sin, right? That's a very difficult, deep spot. Easy to judge. But he's on that mountain. He was on that mountain. We're all traversing at different spots on that mountain. Look at Matthew 16 and verse 21. Matthew 16 and verse 21. From that time, Jesus began to show his disciples that he must go to Jerusalem and suffer many things from the elders and the chief priests and the scribes and be killed and be raised the third day. And then Peter took him aside and began to rebuke him, saying, "Far be it from you, Lord, this shall not happen to you." Sounds innocent, but it's certainly not in line with what Jesus had in mind. He turned and said to Peter, "Get behind me, Satan. You are an offense to me, for you are not mindful of the things of God, but the things of men." Put the curtain down, that's all we ever hear of Peter. Right? He was the guy that wasn't even led by God's Spirit. God said, "Get behind me, Satan. You're filled with Satan's spirit." It's a very, very strong comment that Jesus makes to him. But he was on that journey. He was in a slice of time, wasn't he? He was in a slice, and we know that there was more to the full story of Peter. But again, when you just see this and read this, can you imagine the other disciples, the talk that may have gone on for a couple weeks after that? Wow, I thought Peter was different. I thought Jesus really late. Boy, I don't know who's leading him, and is he going to be around? And you know what I mean? Because we saw him in a moment, but we forget. We're not on the escalator, are we? You think about Abraham, father of the faithful. Well, there's a story where Abraham lied in the Bible, didn't save his neck, right? A slice of life of Abraham again. What do we make of that? It's a difficult thing, right? I am not here condoning that we let, you go sin and it's fine, we just return the other way. No, there's sin and sin to be repented of, but there are times when the journey is not always on the straight path. And if we understand that with each other and view things in a larger context, we have an ability to support, to forgive, to love, to encourage, to walk with instead of walk from. What did Paul say? We know what Paul, you don't need to turn there, that famous verse in Romans 7:19, the things I want to do, I don't. Then he says, the evil that I don't, I do. Paul, struggle. What if you saw Paul in a moment like that? Is our first inclination to, boy, you know what, I always knew that. You walk away. You know what helps? When we see the end game as well, this is a son and daughter of God that's on the mountain, that's in a difficult spot. Right? That's a different mindset now. You think of people on treks on the mountain, you don't leave a body, you don't leave a person. You help, you figure it out, you go back, you regroup. And that's what's talked about here. And you realize as well the fight that's there. I mean, in the model prayer, what is said there? Deliver us from the evil one. Right? Sometimes you understand that this game is not just, there's other players in this game, and Satan is very much alive and well, unfortunately. And I think about when we pray that, I thought about too, God, deliver me from the evil one and help your people. Deliver them as well. How about that? That we think in terms that we all need help at times when Satan is knocking hard and fast, either on our door or a brother or a sister as well, to deliver us. Deliver us from that. But I say in all these things, life is it's a series of tests. It's a big laboratory experiment. And we all find ourselves in these little windows, these slices, and we get opportunities and we get chances to see how we will react. It's very, I guess in some ways painful, even a story like this for Peter that's recorded in the Bible. And I think, boy, what if I had situations? Because I say, you talk about slices of our life, right? A day is a slice. A day is a slice within a slice of our physical life. There's small windows. But even within a day, there's a slice within a slice, right? Have you had an interaction with someone and it got done and you said, I couldn't believe I got into a heated discussion and it was a slice? I thought, if that was recorded here, how would that look, right? Wouldn't we want to afford that to others as well? Another chance, another opportunity. You think of David when you think of that slice of great sin, but he was the one that also had what? In a different slice, great repentance, great psalms, right? It's a beautiful thing when we realize that their spiritual journey, it really is traversing on a mountain. The last point I want to cover this afternoon is When we think about this, when we think about people, when we think about our interactions with them, and we pull back and we try to see them first and foremost as a son and daughter of God, we realize that the journey is not a straight escalator ride to the top. It's a really howling, difficult mountain. A very difficult mountain. And we consider those two things, and we think about the brothers and sisters that God has placed in the body. When we think about humanity at large, who one day will be sons and daughters of God as well in our interactions with them, then we start to think that our primary role should be one of support, not judge and jury. One of support on this journey. We can think so many times of God and the support He's given to us, that in this process that we can give grace to others and to ourselves as we journey forth. Because sometimes it's difficult, as I just said in the last section, it's difficult when you realize you're not progressing as you are, and it's easy to get frozen or stuck into a spot, even with ourselves. Even after we have repented, we might always think of ourselves back here, right, in this spot, locked in here. We might see someone in that spot over here, even though they've moved on. And we remember God when He says in Isaiah 52, I've blotted out your sins, and I don't remember it anymore, right? Because I know what the end game is. I know who you are. You're mine. You're my son. You're my daughter. The same way you would think of that as a parent. We've dealt with that. We're moving past that. And I think once we can do that with ourselves, and that's not always easy, once we can move past that, then it becomes easy to do that with others. To do that with others. Look at 1 Corinthians. Let's go to Colossians. You've been in 1 Corinthians. 1 Corinthians 13, verse 7. I will just say, you know that as a love chapter. I will just add this. I like that verse very much because it talks about hoping all things, enduring all things. When we are walking and supporting someone, isn't that what you do? You hang on until you know absolutely that's not the case, and then we deal differently. It's not we're looking for the first opportunity to latch on and say, yep, I knew it. I knew it all, and I become judge and jury, and I put a little case around that, and it's all justified, and I can go my way now. No, true love, that's why I said how we view each other will determine the depth of our love for one another. In Ephesians 4, forget Colossians for the moment. Ephesians 4. Verse 1 through 3. Again, I'm not going to a lot of new verses, but ones hopefully you can think in a slightly different light. I therefore, the prisoner of the Lord, beseech you to walk worthy of the calling in which you were called, all lowliness, gentleness, long-suffering, bearing with one another in love, enduring to keep the unity of the Spirit and the bond of peace. I don't see anything there about walking away from someone because we've seen something in a slice or a window of time. And we put them to a box and we walk away justified. No, everything you read is about bearing with one another, enduring, showing love. My wife said it well years ago when I thought about different things, and you start thinking about people, and sometimes you can, if you're not in the right spot, you get frustrated, and you see things, and you let things, whether someone's in authority over the years, have we not had a history of that, where it's easy to go to that spot? Right? Because that justifies us a little bit. Right? I had an issue here, but it can't be me, and I build my story, and this is why that's that, and we put that box over here. But my wife said it well years ago. She said, what did you say? No. She said, we're all just at different spots on the journey. That's all it is. We're just in different spots, but you know what? We're on the same mountain. And if we can support, if we can lend a hand, if we can be there, that's what we need to do. And when she said that, it just diffuses everything. You know, any feelings you may have, anything that you look back where I was wronged and this person, no. You know what? Again, don't forget who's behind this. Satan is strong. We go back and we say, God, help me from the evil one. Deliver me, but deliver them as well. right? And you start to think about things differently. The relationship becomes different. Because now we're on a system where we are trying to support, we're trying to lend a hand along this treacherous journey on a very difficult and steep and sometimes unforgiving mountain. I did see a joke this week with seniors, though. It said, speaking of mountains, it said, how did I get over the hill when I never got to the top of the mountain? Anyways, all right. So turn back, if you would, one last verse on this. James 5, when you think about this. I thought about this over the years, and certainly has been not something that's been done perfectly, and certainly can be a regret. And I think about those who have walked with us, and sometimes I'm not so much talking about those who have gone maybe to different groups or done different things, but some of those who have become disillusioned and have walked away. And you wonder how much we have done on this journey to lend a hand. Or if we quietly look up one day and say, oh, so-and-so, I haven't seen them in a while. Right? Look what James says here. It's a powerful verse. James 5 and verse 19. Brethren, if anyone among you wanders from the truth, remember I said it's a difficult journey. It's a mountain. It's got a lot of things we have to traverse. They wander from the truth. They're having some difficulty. And someone judges them and puts them into a box. No, it says if someone turns him back, if someone extends himself, if someone realizes what is needed, let him know that he who turns a sinner from the error of his way will save a soul from death and cover a multitude of sins. You know, we don't need to execute judgment. That's, each one of us are God's child. He knows what's best for us. God knows. God figures it out. A lot of times when people may come and ask about that, and I will say, God knows. God's got that. There's a lot of things we can do to pray and support and be encouraging in those kind of situations, but God knows what's best. So this afternoon, I just wanted to cover off on a couple things on Senior Day, because as I thought over the years, I've thought about this many, many times. It's very easily, subconsciously, to take certain people, whether it's our young people, whether it's our seniors, and not fully appreciate who they are, because we see them in a different spot. We see them at a different point in life. Society tells us there's less value with those people. But there really isn't. There really isn't. There's actually more value. Not only have they done some amazing things with their lives, they're doing some amazing things now, and they're being transformed into the ultimate glory. Glory now as we look to our seniors for their wisdom. Very encouraged often when I talk about them and their stand for righteousness over the years, and difficulties with jobs and situations, or just bearing up in a world where you see the values really thrown upside down, that they stand for the things that are right and righteousness and trusting God. Trust in those days that are difficult and they're hard, but they continue to trust. It's a powerful thing. And there's glory there. And I look at those situations, I look at our young people who have great value, because God is working with them. God sees them as his sons and daughters. So when you have a chance, engage with those young people as well. And then we realize along the way that it's not a straight path to the kingdom. There are some challenges, there are some difficulties. And hopefully we remember that we look at life in that context for ourselves and for others, and realize that's a spot. That's a phase. And through this process that we support and we encourage one another, that's really our role as we go through this. Because we all have slices of our life, don't we? We all see people in different slices of their life. But God sees everything. He sees the full picture. And what's encouraging to me when you look back and you take King David, the example I started with, and you take all those slices, and you can draw any number of conclusions from an individual slice. But when all those slices were put together, and God, who sees all and understands all, described David as a man after my own heart.